Hi everybody, welcome back to another week of video reviews. This week we're going to take on your first crack at your service learning images. One of the things I do want to reinforce before we get going here is that for this project you really need to be doing it in multiple stages. So the idea here is that you go out, shoot images, we look at the images, we figure out what needs to be refined, what needs to be developed, perhaps what might be missing from the project, or even what might be edited out. And then from there, we go back and shoot some more and ultimately come up with a project that is developed over several weeks rather than kind of the one and done approach, which essentially would mean that you go in, shoot something once, and that's it. So this project is designed purposefully to take place over several weeks. With that being said, we had a bunch of people that didn't turn in projects this week, so I just really want to emphasize that this project is due next Monday, the 7th of November. It's due at midnight, and this is a no extensions, no excuses type of deal here. And again, this project is worth a huge portion of your final grade. So if you drop the ball on this one, you're in pretty rough shape for the semester here. And that wouldn't be the greatest thing, because I would say pretty much everyone in the class right now is in a really good position to have a good grade. So please put the time in, get the project done, and make sure that you're refining it, building it, developing it, rather than just trying to nail it all in one visit to your service learning site. So with that being said, let's get to our first student's work here. This is Alyssa's, and Alyssa's working at a school with children who are primarily blind, and she's offered us 3 images this week. The first image, we've got a piece of paper that is kind of set down in a vertical position, and in doing so we kind of see the raised bumps on the paper that are indicative of the fact that the writing is not only in regular writing, but it's also in Braille. We see with those little dots there. And I think this is a really wonderful shot. One of the things that really makes it successful is that we've got this vertical orientation, and all of these lines really lead us deeply into the frame here. So our eye is sort of being pulled deeper and deeper into the project as we read these words. Another thing that I really love here is that she's using that really shallow depth of field. So we don't really see all of the words, we kind of see some of the words. And I think in some ways that can be very symbolic for the experience of having limited eyesight or limited vision, that perhaps you're not seeing all of something, that only some of it is being revealed here. So I think the use of depth of field here is really well done. Also, I think the Braille here is great, although I did speak to Alyssa about this. One of the things we could do is I think we could make this image a little bit more contrasty, and I think in doing so we could bring out each one of these little Braille spots in the image to make them a little bit more emphasized. So other than that, I think really strong image here and a good start for the project. And then a second image, we've got a cane with sort of a ball or a device at the end of it that someone who's blind would use to help them guide themselves around. Again, really love this image, and I think that, again, the use of line to draw our eye into the frame is really sophisticated, really well done. The one thing here, Alyssa, that I might ask you to consider is trying a different crop on this image. And the reason I think I like a little different crop, And perhaps this even means you going out and reshooting this in your next opportunity over there. Or we could do a little bit of Photoshop magic here. But I think putting this sort of at the end of the frame, and then I'm going to go in and do what's called a content aware fill to fill in this spot at the edge of the frame here. What this does is, so I'm going to go in and just make a selection of this area, and I'm doing it with the lasso tool, which is this tool right here. And then if we go under edit, fill, and we select from the pull down screen content aware fill, what that does is Photoshop actually goes in and looks at the surrounding pixels and fills in the area with pixels that kind of match what's going in the surrounding area. Sometimes it works really well. I'm suspecting in this instance that it's probably going to work pretty good, but you never know until you try it. So I'm just going to hit OK here, and we'll see what happens. That's not too bad. I mean, we've got a little bit of area right here where it didn't line up perfectly, but in this instance, it's really just only for demonstration purposes only. So the reason I like this crop here is that it gives us sort of a sense of really how long this hallway is, and that the challenge that this person must encounter when they walk all the way down this hallway. So it gives us a sense of space, a sense of depth, a sense of 3D in there. And I think also it also says something about this space. Notice how there's not a lot of stuff on the floor here, or not a lot of obstacles that this person would encounter. So I think that that's really a smart technique to go with here. Alyssa, I also love the fact that you're down low, almost right by the ground here. So again, this thing sort of becomes very emphasized. I should point out, Alyssa and I met earlier this week, and we did talk about the possibility of making part of this image black and white and part of it color, and she was wondering how to do that. Well, one of the ways we could do that is really just going into a hue saturation layer, which just go up into my layers adjustments, click hue saturation, and then when the panel for the adjustment comes up, simply desaturate the image and it becomes black and white. And then if we wanted to get color in here, we could just paint off some of this layer. And basically, if you notice, our layer has a mask on it that is a white rectangle. Well, if we go in and select over here a black paintbrush, that actually allows us to paint off some of that mask that we've applied in the layer. So in this instance, I'm going to paint off the mask that's on the cane here, and we can bring back the color that was there. And in this way, we've just got one item in the photograph that's in color. Now, the one caveat here is that I think when we start doing this, your images start to get to look a little bit on the gimmicky side. So I think in this instance, Alyssa's photographs are really solid just as is with color. So I'm not necessarily sure we really need to go that route there. But I did think it was important to show everyone the technique, show you how to do it, because one of the things I do find is that that is something that students are interested in learning, and I think it's something that's pretty easy to do in Photoshop, especially when you're working in layers like this. So again, another excellent shot. I think both of these images will work well in your portfolio, Alyssa. And then again, a third shot here. I do think it's really important to get people in your images. I think that personalizes them. It creates a sense of intimacy that wouldn't otherwise be there in the project. And I know that everyone is probably in situations where taking photographs of the people that are using the services is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but I think it's something that you really have to push yourself out of your comfort zone and give it a try, because it does really make a difference. To just have pictures of things sort of makes things very sterile, I guess we could call it. Whereas we introduce people into them, it brings them to life and brings them alive, and we can connect with the project in a much more intimate way. So again, a fantastic shot. I love what's going on here. I think it's pretty obvious that the student is being taught how to read in Braille here. And I also think it's really interesting, her choice of what the subject matter was on the piece of paper. And the subject matter is sun, or a sunny. And it makes us wonder what it must be like to not be able to see sun or experience sun, and perhaps even have the challenge of trying to comprehend what the word sun is when, again, you don't really have a point of comparison, as is the case here, which we have a little boy who's blind. So well done again here. Love the fact that you are using this very shallow or small depth of field. Our background goes out of focus and our eye really goes just to the important subject in the image. So fantastic job here, Alyssa. Look forward to seeing the rest of the project. I think you are well on your way to creating something really wonderful. So keep up the hard work, and look forward to seeing the final project. So next up we have Nick's images. So the first thing I wanted to look at here was his print map. So I had a little bit of confusion from a lot of students regarding the print map. And really, all the print map is a visualization, or sort of an idea of what you wanted to do with your image. So in other words, in Photoshop, we're not just correcting the whole image, we're correcting individual areas of the image. So in this instance, you could see Nick wanted to lighten up the lower half of the image and darken up some of these upper halves. And all we're doing is sort of drawing boundaries, or rough borders around the areas where we wanted to make those adjustments to. So that's all that really was. It's just a tool to kind of force you into thinking about working with individual localized areas in Photoshop, rather than just working with the exposure as a whole. So let's take a look at his images. And by the way, Nick is working at So Ready, which is a place that refugees have a facility to make garments and bags that they then sell in an Etsy store. And I'm really glad Nick could do this, because we were really looking to get some images of this to help them out, and it looks like Nick did a really good job of getting those. So first image, I love the detail kind of shot and the focus in on the hands of the person. I think hands are really an interesting feature of people. I think it's one of those things that, like fingerprints, they distinguish themselves, or each one of our personalities is distinguished partly through our hands. It almost, gives a narrative about our life story. You think about people with really rough hands, says something about, they're workers. They might be, mechanics or carpenters, or even people that work with sewing machines. So I really like the focus in on the hands here. I even like the little bit of blurring with the needle, or the mechanism that puts the needle in. And I like that in contrast to where the hands are in sharp focus. The one thing here, Nick, I just wonder if, I'm kind of zooming in here. I think just going a little bit tighter in here, I think presents even more of an interesting detail, and perhaps having a little bit sharper focus here, and maybe that is just the movement. In fact, it is the movement of this mechanism. So I think that that works there. And maybe even, I guess the one thing we could do here is kind of burn this area in. I think maybe this area is just a little bit dark. That's perhaps the one thing that's throwing me off. So I'm just doing a new levels adjustment here. I invert that level, and then I use my white brush tool to bring that back in a little bit like that. So just kind of refine that a little bit. So I think that maybe that little adjustment, I think, helps that a bit. So good shot there. You know, the more I look at this, though, I do have to say that having this little piece of fabric right here, I think that also contributes to what's going on in here. So maybe I wouldn't crop that quite as tight as that. Sorry, I'm having mouse mayhem here. So maybe the crop should be something like that image. And then our next shot, again, I like the fact that you're using the small depth of field. The emphasis, again, is on the sewing machine and what's going on here. I like the fact that her hands also are in focus, where everything else, again, in the background there is out of focus. I just wonder, again, in this image, if we kind of play around with the exposure, what happens. You know, certainly we could go really dark here and bring some emphasis to just this area of where the stitching is taking place in there. So you know, perhaps I again would just do a technique where things go a little bit darker in this area. Maybe we'll just do this whole machine a little bit darker. And then I think I'd like to see the woman here, I think, having her a little bit lighter. Maybe that balances this scene out a little bit and brings a little emphasis to this area here. Maybe toggle that just a little bit. So just, again, sort of trying to get everybody to think about refining your images and looking at local areas within the image and seeing how we can improve those spots through the use of very specific adjustments in there. So again, another nice shot here, Nick. So nothing wrong with this image or the last one, but I think as an overall narrative, you have to pick one or the other of these shots. And I suspect the previous one, I think, looks a little bit better because we have some of the person's face and we get a sense of who they are and what their you know, character might be, or just personality might be. You know, I think part of it is, you know, showing that this is a refugee community, and showing her face does give us the sense that she perhaps is not originally from this country, and it helps us understand maybe a little bit more about her life story. Whereas in this image, the sewing machine's kind of blocking all of that out. Although again, I mean, I love what's going on here. So, you know, certainly these little tight shots can be part of the overall story that is conveyed through your 8 to 10 images, but also really want to avoid repeating similar shots. Now, again, I know we've got these women are pretty much all doing the same thing, so you sort of have to figure out a way to tell the story in many different ways. Maybe I'd think about focusing in on the spool of thread, something like that. Um, Again, just to kind of get some different things in there. So good job here, Nick. Again, I think you are on the right track, and you've got a great subject matter to work with here. So just a matter of keep building that library of images that you're doing, and you should be in good shape for the. Okay, next up we have Kat's photos. And again, Kat, really nice job with all of these images. She's working at the West Side Bazaar with her images, and I think that in the 3 images here, if we sort of look at them real quickly, I think we get sort of that idea of having a person in there, then giving us sort of this small detail, and then giving us sort of a little bit of a wider shot. In the traditional photo essay type of documentary photography, we have the sort of map that tells us, okay, we want to take some wide shots, we want to take some mid-range or sort of slightly close-up shots, and then we want to take some tight detail kind of shots. So I think in this sense, you certainly have done that. Great image. I especially love the fabric of her sweater, and again, it sort of has just a really unique pattern to it. I also love the fact that her scarf here also is got this really, again, I don't know what we would call it, sort of a paisley pattern to it, but we can really see the texture in it. And all of these lines sort of lead us inward in the photograph, right down towards her hands here. I think it's interesting that you did choose to do this with a shallow depth of field, which again kind of draws our eye to the thing that is in focus rather than the thing that is out of focus. I think without that shallow depth of field, our eye might tend to go towards this thing that she is working with here, whereas using the shallow depth of field, our eye really goes to the face here, and this becomes much more of a people photograph than an image about what she's making. So I like that a lot. I do almost wonder if we could go just a little bit lighter with this image. It feels a little bit dark to me. So, I just went in, created a new adjustment level, and then changed this blending mode from normal to screen. And then I just changed the opacity here to bring it kind of in that range right there. So I think here we've got a little bit more pop to it, and it feels a little less dark and dreary. I mean, I think this whole story that you're telling here is one that's kind of an upbeat story. And I know from my experiences at the West Side Bazaar that it's also sort of a very colorful place. So I tend to want to, have images that are a little bit brighter and have a little bit more pop to them rather than sort of being dark and gloomy, I guess would be the best way to put it in this instance. So there's sort of the before, there's the after, or we could toggle our little eye on or off. So great job with this shot. Really like what you're doing. I think this shot is also fantastic too. I mean, that sort of lavender insole in the shoes is just fantastic and so different than something we'd see, in a DSW shoe store or something like that. So I think it works really well. I like, again, the fact that you've got the shallow depth of field here. I almost wonder, again, if you might want to consider cropping this image and, again, doing maybe something like this to make it even tighter. Just want to get you out of the habit of putting everything square in the dead center middle of your frame here, which in this instance, I mean, I can see why you're doing it, and I think it works really well here because it's kind of flanked by these two lavender colored insoles. So, just more or less something to consider down the road. So I want to just kind of give you an example. Again, great job with the shallow depth of field here. I love that. I think that works really well for this image. And then your last image here, I think this is a perfect shot to give us a little bit of a wider shot and sort of give a taste or a feeling for all the different things that are available in the store, and also how all of the different cultures are represented. I think the couple refinements I'd make in this photograph is, first of all, I think I'd want to see your horizon leveled here, or this bottom line in the photograph leveled rather than being diagonal. So I just went into my crop tool, and if you see when I go into the crop tool, I get the little grid here that helps me level that off a little bit. So I think I'd want to get this leveled, something like that. And I think in this instance, this probably is one image that I'd like to see a larger depth of field on. And the way we could do the larger depth of field here is put our camera on a tripod and do a longer exposure, but make sure that we have an aperture value that's really high. So I'm going to go in here and take a look. See, you're at an f-stop of 2.0, which is great for giving us a really shallow depth of field. But if you switch this up to f-stop of 22, that's going to give us a really large depth of field, and all these little products are going to be in focus. The problem with that is your exposure time is going to be really long. It's probably going to be a half second or a second long, in which case you're going to have to use your tripod on that. There's just no way you can hand hold that image and still come up with a good image. So that's the one thing I think I'd like you to do here. Also, I am noticing a little bit of noise in your images, and I know we've talked about this before, and just want to talk about it again real quickly. So here's an image from Camera Raw that I took. And if you notice, the image was taken at a really high ISO of 3200. And when we do really high ISOs like that, what ends up happening is that we get a lot of noise in an image. I've actually got noise reduction applied to this image, so I'm going to take that off right now. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit closer. Oh, maybe a little bit farther away. I'll get it. Bear with me here. So if you look in this player's arms and in his jersey, you'll notice it's kind of like a little grainy structure to the photograph. So that's our noise that's being introduced at the high ISOs. And even at low ISOs, you could get it in dark areas of your photo where there's not enough exposure. So the way we get rid of this is we just go into Camera Raw, and then we go to this third tab from the left called the Detail tab, and we go down here to our noise reduction, and the luminance noise reduction tab is what we want to work with. So I'm going to put this up to about 30, and if you notice, now that graininess has gotten a lot smoother in there. And we can also kind of play around with the luminance detail. And basically what the luminance detail does is it preserves the sharpness of the edges in all of the details here. So if you notice, if I was to go really far with this noise reduction, the image almost starts to look too soft and too flat. There we go, it finally kicked in there. Notice we're starting to lose sort of some of the detail and the structure of his arm, especially the shadow area that has his muscles in it. It almost looks kind of cartoony. So you don't want to go too far with your luminance adjustment. You know, somewhere between 20 and 30 is probably going to be the best. And then play around with this detail a little bit to see if you can kind of get it in a spot that it's a nice compromise between eliminating some of the noise and maintaining some of your detail. And then also, I would also recommend, if you go up in the sharpening, pull your radius down a little bit and pull your masking up, maybe up to about 45, and your sharpening even up to 45 too. So this is, again, in the camera raw panel before you even open up your image. And this is one of the big reasons that we do use camera raw here. So for everybody, you know, a good idea to check on that noise reduction in there. And we'll let this image open up real quickly here, and we can see what the final product looks like. Now there's that bouncing ball that we all hate. And then if we go in here, push that in a little bit, we can see that some of that grain has been, or noise has been minimized. You know, it's still there, but like I said, it's a compromise. We want to, you know, knock it down, get rid of it to a certain extent, but we don't want to get rid of it so much that it makes our image look too soft. So in this instance, we can see there's still that sharpness there, but we also have the reduction of noise in the image. So that's how we do noise reduction. And cat images look good. I think maybe, you know, what I'd like to see, a few more people shots, and then maybe even a few more shots where you go even wider and show the whole facility. I'd even like to see maybe a shot of the outside of it too. Perhaps even a shot in late afternoon, early evening, where the sky has got just a little bit of color in it, and we're picking up some of the ambient light from inside the store. So just a couple thoughts moving forward, but again, looks like you're in pretty solid shape here. And then last but not least, we have Alexis's work. She's also working at the West Side Bazaar. And I think it's great that Alexis and Kat are working on this project together. I think it's a lot easier to approach people and work with people when you have a couple of friends there to help out. So those of you guys that are still you know, struggling through this project, probably not a half bad idea to grab a friend and try working on this with a friend, especially if, you know, the friend has some sort of established connection already to the place that you're working at. So again, love the fact that we've got the little detail shot. Lots of texture going on here, lots of colors going on here, and I love the fact that you put the area that's in focus in one of those rule of thirds places. You know, if you recall when we start talking about rule of thirds, it's the idea where, sorry to destroy your photo here, Alexis, but you know, there's our thirds when we divide our frame up into thirds, and there's that spot where the eye sort of carries a lot of interest. So if we were to go in any one of those four areas, generally speaking, the rule of third tells us that images are going to sort of carry an extra level of interest in them. So get out of the habit of putting your subjects directly in the center of the frame and begin to start working those edges in there. So love this shot, Alexis. The only refinement, again, that I might suggest here is just lightening the image up a teeny little bit here. In this instance, I went just about half as bright, or doubling the brightness, I guess we could say, in this instance. And I think that just makes the colors pop a little bit more. Again, just kind of like Kat's shots, I think the darkness kind of feels a little bit brooding, where the brightness is a little bit more cheerful, and I think says a little bit about that overwhelming saturation of colors that you see in this place. So good job on that image. Second image, very similar to Kat's photograph. Again, really like the shot, but I almost wonder if we take this image so that we could see her face. I think that certainly would add a level of interest and kind of differentiate your photograph from Kat's. I think in this instance, maybe prefer Kat's shot just because this feels like sort of empty or dead space in this area here. And I like the intimacy of the little bit of tighter shot that was right here. I think this ends up really drawing our visual attention to all these patterns and textures that are going on here. And even sort of that little glimpse into her face gives us that little added level of intimacy to who she is, and helps us connect with her a little bit more. And well, just as I say that, look what we got here. A fantastic image. Absolutely love this image, Kat. I think this is a home run. I'm sorry, Kat, Alexis. Sorry about that. Again, you know, we get her personality, we see who she is, and I think in context or in relationship to those two other images, I think all of them combined together really end up telling a wonderful story. So great job on this. Perhaps the one thing I would do here is add a little bit more sharpening to the image. And I know I haven't shown you guys this technique, but we'll show it to you here in this tutorial. So go up under layer, make a duplicate layer, hit OK, and then once we're in that layer, we go into filter, other, and then high pass. And you're going to notice right away the image goes into sort of like this black and white image. And what high pass is doing is it's basically sharpening the edges in the image here. So if you notice as I move this, we can see the edges become really sharp, especially in her sweater here. So I'm going to push this forward. I'm going to hit OK. And of course, we see the image and it doesn't look correct. It's some sort of odd thing happening in it. Well, that's really easy to correct in that we just change our blending mode from normal to soft light, and all of a sudden we can see how that pops in. Now look, here's the before, here's the after. Well, I really love how this makes her sweater super sharp and all the fabric in there super sharp, but I honestly don't like the sharpness in her face. I think it makes her face look too sharp. So what we can do is we can just go in and apply what's known as a layer mask. So if we come right down here to the bottom of our layers window, press on this icon, we can see the mask now as a white rectangle. So I'm going to go in and choose a black paintbrush and then just paint away that sharpness on her face. So it leaves that skin with a little bit of softness. I think with skin we don't want it to be too sharp because, you know, it starts to emphasize sort of the natural flaws that are in the face. So in this instance we can give it sort of a nice sort of smooth texture to it. Of course, you know, if I wanted to even play around with this further, maybe her eyes though, I think, you know, again, we like to have eyes really sharp. So I could just go back in and paint the mask on her eyes and maybe her eyebrows. This way her skin and her cheeks and everything has a certain softness, but we still have that sharpness in the eyes right there. So that is a quick little tutorial on high pass, what's called high pass sharpening. So you would have to flatten this image, so layer, flatten image, and then you could save it as a JPEG. So great work here, Alexis. Again, I think you and Kat are well on your way to producing a really good portfolio of images. So keep up the good work. And then to everybody, as we conclude this tutorial and review, I just want to make sure everybody is on track here and they know that next Monday, the 7th, do need to have all your images together. I think everybody here gave us a really good sample of what I'm looking for in your project. So make sure that you follow the lead of these 4 students, and you should have some good success. So I look forward to seeing the final projects, and I'll be back with you again next week.